There are two maps for the world we live in. The old one made of asphalt, dirt roads, and street signs, and the new one made of pixels, satellites, and code. We have learned to place our absolute, unquestioning faith in the second. But faith is a fragile thing. What happens when that trust is broken? What happens when the digital voice that acts as our guide leads us deliberately astray, not to a wrong turn, but to a wrong reality? Tonight, we delve into 4 extensive, deeply unsettling chronicles from delivery drivers who found themselves at this terrifying intersection. These are not simple tales of being lost. They are detailed accounts of impossible locations, of phantom apartments existing on floors that were never built, of houses that faded into thin air, and of roads that led to the edge of a world that was not our own. These are stories of what happens when the Vine Road map glitches and shows you what's truly underneath. But before we follow this path into the unknown, make sure you're subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell dot in the places we're going tonight. You will not want to be disconnected. Going up. There are cities that sleep, and then there is Chicago. Even after midnight, with the Great Lakes breathing a cold, damp mist over the asphalt, the city feels less asleep and more like a predator at rest. Its heartbeat is the distant rumble of the L train on elevated tracks, its veins, the sprawling grid of rain-slicked streets, reflecting a million neon and sodium lights. It was in this hushed, predatory quiet of a Tuesday night in October that Marco Guidry, a man who knew the city's veins better than most, found himself driving toward the river. For the past 2 years, Marco's chariot had been a beat-up 2012 Toyota Camry, its cabin smelling perpetually of stale coffee, and the ghosts of 1,000 different food orders. He wasn't just a delivery driver. He was a former architecture student from the University of Illinois, a man who once dreamed of designing buildings like the one he was now approaching. Life, however, had a way of altering blueprints. A family crisis had forced him to drop out, trading his drafting table for a steering wheel, his dreams of steel and glass, for the immediate reality of paying his mother's medical bills. Every late-night delivery, every 5-star rating, was a small brick in the wall he was trying to build around his family's fragile security. Tonight's final run was for Urban Eats, the city's dominant delivery app. The order itself was mundane. 1 large pepperoni pizza and a 2-liter bottle of Coke from Luigi's Pizzeria. What was unusual was the destination. His phone screen glowed with the address: the Zenith Tower, 111 West Wacker Drive, Apartment 13. Marco knew the building. He'd watched it being built. A sleek, almost arrogant monolith of dark glass and obsidian steel that had clawed its way into the Chicago skyline. It was a monument to wealth and modern design, and the idea of someone in its upper echelons ordering from Luigi's felt dissonant, like a billionaire wearing a Timex. Still, an order was an order. The payout was $18. A generous tip already included. Another brick for the wall. He pulled the Toyota Camry into the semicircular driveway, the building's entrance glowing with a warm, intimidating light. The rain fell harder, drumming a nervous rhythm on his car's roof. He grabbed the pizza bag, the cardboard already growing slightly soft from the steam, and ran for the revolving door. The lobby was even more impressive up close. Polished Calicut marble floors reflected the recessed lighting and long, distorted streaks. The air smelled of ozone, rain, and an expensive, unidentifiable cleaning agent. On the far wall hung a massive, abstract oil painting, a chaotic swirl of blacks and blues that seemed to absorb the room's silence. A doorman, an older gentleman with a perfectly trimmed gray mustache and a uniform that probably cost more than Marco's monthly rent, stood behind a marble podium. His name tag read Arthur, Marco approached, holding the pizza bag forward like an offering. He announced the Urban Eats delivery for apartment 13A. His voice sounded small in the vast space. Arthur's polite smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked from Marco to the pizza bag and back again. He tapped a few times on a tablet embedded in the podium. 13A, you said? Marco confirmed. Yes, sir. Arthur's fingers paused over the screen. He looked up, his gaze holding Marco's for a fraction of a second too long. That's peculiar. Are you quite certain of the apartment number? The question hung in the air, weighted with an unspoken significance. It wasn't the standard, could you repeat that? It felt like a test. Marco's unease, just a small seed before, began to properly sprout. He unlocked his phone and showed the screen to Arthur. The order details were sharp and clear under the lobby's soft light. Right here, sir. Apartment 13A. Customer name is J. Doe. Arthur stared at the screen, his professional mask momentarily slipping into an expression of genuine puzzlement, maybe even concern. I see, he said, his voice a low murmur. He straightened up, his composure returning. Very well. The residential elevators are just down that hall to your left. Please, be efficient. He turned away, his body language a clear dismissal, leaving Marco with the distinct feeling that he had just failed the test. The elevator ride was silent and smooth. The interior was paneled with dark, polished wood and smelled faintly of leather. Marco's reflection looked back at him from the mirrored ceiling, tired, damp, and now visibly anxious. He watched the glowing numbers on the sleek, black touchscreen panel. His architectural mind took over for a moment, appreciating the minimalist design. He ran his finger down the screen to find the 13th floor. His finger stopped. He scanned the list again, and again. 1, 2, 3, up to 11, 12. And then the list jumped directly to PH1 and PH2. There was number 13. A jolt, cold and electric, shot through him. He tapped the 12 button, his mind racing. The plan was simple. Get to the 12th floor, find the fire stairs, and walk up one flight. Buildings, especially new ones, were governed by logic, by codes. There had to be a rational explanation. The 12th floor hallway was even more profound in its silence. The thick carpeting absorbed all sound, creating a vacuum that felt unnerving. Doors marked 12A, 12B, 12C, and 12D were spaced evenly along the corridor. He found the stairwell door, exactly where it should be. The sign was standard. Emergency exit only. Roof access. Alarm will sound. He tried the handle. It was solid steel, cold to the touch and locked tight. Not just locked, but immovable, as if it hadn't been opened in years. Frustration was quickly being replaced by a more primal feeling, dread. He was trapped on this floor with a cooling pizza and an order he couldn't complete. He pulled out his phone. The app flashed. Customer unavailable. He then manually dialed the number. It rang 4 times before connecting to a generic, network-provided voicemail. The subscriber you have dialed is not available. No name. No personal greeting. The voicemail of a ghost. A burner phone. He leaned against the wall, the cool marble a stark contrast to his suddenly clammy skin. He took a deep breath and tried to think. The logical thing was to leave. But Marco wasn't just anyone. He was the architecture student who saw an impossible problem. He was the son who needed that $18. He went back down to the lobby. Arthur was now diligently polishing the marble podium, his back to the elevators. Marco cleared his throat. Excuse me? Arthur? The doorman turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Is there a problem, sir? Yes, Marco said, his voice firmer now. You said you were puzzled by the apartment number. Why? Arthur sighed, a weary, heavy sound. Sir, I've worked here since the day this building opened. This tower was designed by the late Alistair Finch. a brilliant man. But eccentric Dot, he had very specific ideas. One of them was a staunch aversion to the number 13. There has never been a 13th floor in this building. Not in the plans, not in construction. It does not exist. Marco felt the floor drop out from under him. That's impossible. The order is right here. Apps can be wrong, sir. Technology can have ghosts in the machine. Arthur's eyes flickered for a moment towards the elevators, a flash of genuine fear in them. My advice to you, son, is to cancel the order. Tell your company there was a system error. Go home. The way he said go home wasn't a suggestion. It was a plea. Marco, however, saw something else. A challenge. An architectural impossibility. His mind was now hooked. He thanked Arthur and walked out of the lobby. Not to his car, but to the rain-swept sidewalk across the street. He looked up, counting the floors, his old student instincts taking over. He counted the window lines. 10, 11, 12. Then a wider band of dark, reflective glass for the penthouse levels. It all seemed to line up. But between the 12th floor and the penthouse, was the spacing just a little too wide? Was it a trick of the light, the rain? Or was there a sliver of a floor, a hidden layer, masterfully concealed behind the building's sleek facade? He got back in his Toyota Camry, not to leave, but to think. He pulled out his phone and started searching. Alastair Finch Architect, Chicago. The Zenith Tower blueprints. Zenith Tower, 13th floor. Nothing. The search results were sanitized. All official PR and architectural reviews praising Finch's uncompromising vision. But Marco had his old University of Illinois student credentials. He logged into the university's archival database for architectural and engineering journals. He dug deeper, past the public-facing documents, and then he found it. Single scanned document from a preliminary construction bid dated 6 years ago. It was an early structural blueprint, and there it was, a ghost on the page. Between the 12th and PH levels, a floor was clearly marked. Floor 13, mechanical and private residential suite. The suite was labeled simply, a Finch, private. In all subsequent official blueprints, this floor was gone. Replaced by an expanded mechanical space. It had been designed, planned, and then deliberately erased from history. A chill, colder than the October rain, washed over him. This wasn't a glitch. This was a secret. He grabbed the old, worn multi-tool from his glove compartment, its weight familiar in his hand. The $18 was forgotten. This was now about solving the puzzle. He walked back into the tower, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He strode past Arthur, who simply watched him go, a look of profound resignation on his face. Back in the elevator, he didn't even glance at the other floors. His eyes were fixed on the spot on the panel between 12 and P. He could see it clearly now, the faint hairline seam of the blind plate. He took out the multi-tool, selected the flathead screwdriver, and with a trembling hand, he inserted the tip into the seam and pried. There was a soft click. And the plate popped off into his hand. Behind it, there was no button. There was something far older, a small, brass, key-operated service switch, the kind used for maintenance overrides. Using the pliers on his multi-tool, Marco gripped the small knob of the switch. He took one last shuddering breath and turned it clockwise. The elevator gave a violent shudder. The lights flickered and died, plunging him into absolute darkness. For a terrifying second, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing. Then, with a low, grinding groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the building, the elevator began to move. Not up, not down, but with a strange, sideways lurch before it began its ascent. This was no longer the smooth, silent ride from before. It was rough, mechanical, the sound of rusted chains and protesting gears echoing in the dark. It felt like it was climbing for an eternity. far longer than a single floor should take. Finally, with a deafening clang, it stopped. The doors didn't slide open. They screeched, scraping against metal, opening just enough for him to squeeze through. He stepped out, and the doors slammed shut behind him, the sound final and absolute. He was not in a hallway. He was in a space that defied logic. The air was frigid, carrying the smell of damp concrete, ozone from sparking wires, and a bizarrely sweet, cloying scent like rotting flowers. It was a floor caught between creation and decay. The floor was raw, unfinished concrete, but partially covered by an exquisite Persian rug, thick with plaster dust. The walls were exposed drywall and steel studs, but on one wall, a single, ornate gas lamp-style sconce flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. Wires hung from the ceiling like dead vines, but in the center of the space hung a magnificent, dust-covered crystal chandelier. It was a place of impossible contradictions. And at the far end of this strange cavernous space was a single, heavy oak door with a tarnished, hand-carved letter nailed to it. He walked towards it, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The pizza bag felt absurdly heavy in his hand. He reached the door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and peered inside. The room was a study, a library. Every wall was covered, floor to ceiling, with bookshelves. They were filled not with novels, but with heavy tomes on philosophy, theoretical physics, occult geometry, and ancient history. In the center of the room was a massive drafting table, littered with blueprints, but these were not drawings of a building. They were impossible shapes, staircases that folded in on themselves, rooms that occupied the same space. Simultaneously, they were blueprints for madness. A single leather armchair sat facing a vast, floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the glittering expanse of Chicago. And on the drafting table, next to a blueprint of a tesseract, was an open, leather-bound journal. Marco, compelled by a force he no longer understood, stepped inside. He placed the pizza on the floor, his eyes fixed on the journal. The handwriting was an elegant, spidery script. He read the last entry, dated over a year ago. The final. Calculations are complete. Triskaidekaphobia is not a superstition. It is a primal understanding that certain numbers, certain spaces, exist on a different frequency. The world thinks I erased the 13th floor. The fools. I didn't erase it. I untethered it. This suite is no longer just in the Zenith Tower. It is in the idea of every 13th floor. It is a place that touches all the other forgotten, unlucky, and hidden spaces. Tonight, I will turn the final key. I will become a permanent resident of the idea, not the building. If anyone ever finds this, know this. The door, once you walk through it, does not open the same way twice. You do not leave the 13th floor. You only find a different door to somewhere else. As Marco finished the last sentence, he heard it, a soft, dry chuckle that seemed to come from right behind him. The same airy, distant chuckle he had heard on the phone. A cold terror seized him, a paralysis of pure fear. He spun around. The room was empty, but the heavy oak door he had just walked through, it clicked shut with a soft final thud. He lunged for it, his hands slapping against smooth, cold, unblemished wood. The doorknob was gone. He was trapped. The room was plunged into darkness as the single flickering sconce in the outer hall died. The only light was the cold, indifferent glow of the city through the massive window. And the chuckling was all around him now, a soft, mocking whisper. In the dark, it was the voice of Alistair Finch, the ghost in his own impossible machine. Marco was no longer just a delivery driver. He was the newest resident of the 13th floor.
You're not on the map anymore.
There's a specific kind of exhaustion that only a single parent working a second job truly understands. It's a bone-deep weariness that caffeine can't touch, a mental fog that settles in right around the third hour of a 4-hour shift. For Sarah Jenkins, this exhaustion was a constant companion. It sat next to her in the passenger seat of her aging Honda Civic as she navigated the sprawling, semi-rural suburbs of southern New Jersey. Her world had shrunk to a series of tightly controlled loops. Wake up, get her 8-year-old son, Josh, ready for school, work her 9-to-5 data entry job. Pick up Josh, make dinner. And then, once he was asleep, venture back out into the night for a 4 to 6 hour shift with the delivery app, FlexFare. Every completed delivery was a small victory against the mountain of bills on her kitchen counter. More importantly, every dollar earned was a step closer to a better life for Josh. He'd been diagnosed with childhood asthma 6 months prior, and the wheezing that sometimes rattled his small chest was a sound that haunted Sarah's quietest moments. The doctors recommended a move away from their small, damp apartment in Camden to a dry area and a new, more advanced nebulizer that insurance only partially covered. So, Sarah drove. She drove through the affluent streets of Cherry Hill and the quiet cul-de-sacs of Medford, fueled by a fierce, quiet desperation that felt like a low-grade fever. She was a good driver, cautious and methodical. She trusted her process, and she trusted the technology that guided her. Her phone, mounted securely on the dash, was her lifeline, her map, and her boss, all rolled into one glowing screen. This particular night in late August was thick and humid, the air heavy with the promise of a thunderstorm that never broke. The cicadas were a deafening, electric hum in the trees. It was almost 11 p.m., and Sarah was ready to call it a night. Her last delivery had taken her further east than usual, towards the sparsely populated edges of the Pine Barrens. Just as she was about to set her status to offline, a final order pinged. The payout was unusually high, $25 for a simple pickup from a Wawa on Route 206 in Hamilton and a drop-off about 15 miles away. The address was 417 Ashen Road, Chemung Township. The customer's name was Caleb. $25 was too good to pass up. It was another prescription refill for Josh. It was half a tank of gas. She whispered to herself, "Okay, one last ride." The pickup at the Wawa was uneventful. The familiar, sterile brightness of the store was a small comfort. She grabbed the bag, 2 sandwiches and a large soda, and got back in her car. The FlexFare app glowed, the GPS voice calmly directing her back onto the road. In 200 feet, turn right onto Ashen Road. Sarah made the turn. The first few miles were normal. Paved roads, occasional houses set back from the trees, their porch lights, like lonely stars. But as she drove deeper, the landscape began to change. The houses disappeared. The streetlights vanished. The pristine asphalt gave way to cracked, patched pavement, and then, abruptly, to a hard-packed dirt and sand road. The towering pines closed in on either side, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a dark, claustrophobic tunnel. Her Honda's headlights barely pierced the oppressive darkness. This wasn't unusual for the Pine Barrens, but it was unnerving. She checked her phone. The GPS showed her icon moving steadily along a perfectly straight, blue line labeled Ashen Road. The screen showed a paved road, but the rattling of her car suspension and the crunch of sand under her tires told a different story. The cell signal, which had been a steady 4 bars, flickered to 3, then 2. The GPS voice announced suddenly, though her route hadn't changed, recalculating. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. It was the same feeling she got when Josh's breathing became shallow. It was the feeling of things being outside of her control. She slowed the car, thinking of turning back, but the app was insistent. Your destination is 1.5 miles ahead. She trusted the technology. She had to. The dirt road grew narrower, more rutted. Branches scraped against the sides of her car with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The cell signal dropped to a single blinking bar, then an X. No service. She was alone out here, with only the app's downloaded map to guide her. The silence in the car became immense, broken only by the engine and the unsettling sounds of the forest. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the voice returned, clear and confident. "You have arrived. Your destination is on the left." Sarah stopped the car and peered through the windshield. There was no house. To her left was a small, natural clearing in the pines. Her headlights illuminated a scene of quiet desolation. A low, crumbling stone foundation, barely a foot high, choked with weeds and saplings. It was the unmistakable footprint of a house that no longer existed. In the center of the foundation, a single blackened chimney stack stood like a tombstone, a silent monument to a long-forgotten tragedy. She whispered, her voice trembling slightly. No, this can't be right. She turned the car off, plunging the clearing into near-total darkness, save for the weak glow of her phone screen. The app was frozen on the delivery complete screen. The map showing her car parked neatly beside a non-existent house. This was more than a glitch. A GPS could be off by a few feet, maybe even a few hundred. It couldn't invent a destination. It couldn't take her to a ghost. A wave of cold fear washed over her. She was miles down a dirt road with no cell service, at a location that was a scar on the land, with a bag of cooling sandwiches for a customer named Caleb who wasn't there. She tried the in-app call function, knowing it was useless. Failed to connect. She restarted her phone, a desperate, futile ritual. When it powered back on, the same no service icon mocked her. Panic began to set in, sharp and cold. She had to get out of there, but as she reached for the ignition, she saw it, a faint flickering light through the trees, about a quarter mile further down the path. It was a single yellow light, the kind from a window, a house, a real house. Relief, potent and overwhelming, flooded her system. Someone was out there. Someone could help. Maybe they knew Caleb. Maybe they had a landline she could use. The drive to the light was slow and tense. The path was barely a path at all now. When she finally emerged into another clearing, she saw an old two-story farmhouse, the kind that had stood for 100 years. The paint was peeling and the porch sagged, but the warm light in the downstairs window was the most welcoming sight she had ever seen. A beat-up Ford pickup truck was parked out front. She pulled up behind it, took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and got out. The air was thick with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. As she walked up the creaking porch steps, the door opened before she could knock. An old man stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light from inside. He was thin, wiry, with a weathered face and cautious eyes. He held a half-eaten apple in one hand. His voice was a gravelly New Jersey piney accent. "Can I help you, miss?" Sarah breathed, the words tumbling out. "Oh, thank God. I'm so sorry to bother you this late. I'm a delivery driver. My GPS, it went crazy. It sent me to an address just down the road, but there's nothing there. Just an old foundation." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a slow bite of his apple, chewing thoughtfully as he studied her. "Ashen Road?" he asked. Sarah nodded. The man continued. "Let me guess. GPS said 417. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Yes." "How? Did you know?" The man sighed, a long, weary sound, and gestured with his head for her to come inside. His voice dropped. "You're not the first one. Come on in out of the dark. Names. Peterson. Henry Peterson." The inside of the house was simple and cluttered, but clean. It smelled of wood smoke and old books. Mr. Peterson led her to a small kitchen table. "You want some coffee? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah admitted, sinking into a chair. I feel like I have dot. What is that place? What's going on? Mr. Peterson poured 2 mugs of coffee from an old percolator. He sat down opposite her, his face grim in the dim light. He began, his voice low. That place was 417 Ashen Road. The Miller house was a nice family. Lived there for generations, but must be 15 years ago now, there was a fire. A bad one. The whole place went up like a tinderbox. The parents, George and Mary, they didn't make it out. A chill unrelated to the night air crept down Sarah's spine. Oh my God, that's horrible. Peterson agreed, stirring his coffee. It was. The fire was ruled an arson. They always suspected the son. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The son. Yeah, Peterson said, taking a sip. Quiet kid. A little strange. He was a teenager then. They had a big fight that night, him and his father. The kid disappeared after the fire. Police looked for him for years. Never found him. Most folks around here think he died out in the pines somewhere, but some think he never left. The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the story hanging in the air. Sarah's mind was reeling. A prank? A sick joke? Who would order food to a burned-down house? She finally found her voice, her words barely a whisper. The customer's name. The name on my delivery order. It was Caleb. The effect of that name on Henry Peterson was instantaneous and terrifying. The color drained from his weathered face. The coffee mug in his hand trembled, sloshing dark liquid onto the table. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a fear so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the room. He slowly put the mug down, his hand shaking. He breathed the name like a curse. Caleb Miller. That was the boy's name. Suddenly, the entire situation shifted. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a prank. The strange looks from the Wawa cashier, the insistent GPS, the dead-end phone number. It was all coalescing into a picture of unimaginable horror. The food. Order wasn't for a ghost. It was from a monster. A real, living monster who might still be out there. Peterson whispered, his voice hoarse. He does this sometimes. The police, they think he uses the apps. A stolen credit card maybe. To see if anyone will come. To see if the road is still clear. To come back home. The full implication of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She wasn't a random victim of a tech error. She had been summoned. She was a pawn in a 15-year-old tragedy, a test subject for a killer. The crickets outside no longer sounded like nature. They sounded like a warning siren. Every shadow in the room seemed to deepen. The fear was no longer about being lost. It was about being found. Sarah stood up so quickly, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. I have to go. I have to call the police. Peterson's eyes darted towards the dark window. There's no signal out here, miss. But my son, he's the chief of police in Wharton. I have a radio. He stood and walked over to an old ham radio set in the corner. As he picked up the receiver, Sarah's phone, sitting dead on the table, suddenly lit up. A single notification had pushed through a fleeting wisp of signal. It was from the FlexFare app. The customer, Caleb, had just added a tip, and below the amount was a message. A single chilling sentence. I see you found my neighbors. Tell them I'll be home soon. Before Sarah could even scream, the radio on the corner crackled to life. But it wasn't Henry Peterson speaking. A new voice came through the speaker. A young man's voice, distorted by static but filled with a calm, terrifying amusement. No need to call for help, Mr. Peterson. I'm already here. The conclusion was a blur of primal fear. Peterson dropped the receiver, his face a mask of horror. He pointed a trembling finger towards the back of the house. He CROAKED. The cellar. Go. Sarah didn't hesitate. She ran, her heart hammering against her ribs. She scrambled down a set of rickety wooden stairs into a damp, musty cellar just as she heard the back door of the farmhouse splintering open upstairs. She found an old coal chute, small and choked with cobwebs, and squeezed her way through, emerging into the wet grass behind the house. She didn't look back. She ran through the dark, thorny underbrush of the Pine Barrens, fueled by pure adrenaline, the image of her son's face her only guide. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, finally collapsing on the paved shoulder of the main road, miles from the farmhouse. The police found her an hour later, a gibbering, hysterical mess. Henry Peterson was found in his kitchen, unharmed but in a state of profound shock. Of Caleb Miller, there was no trace. The official report listed the incident as a cruel but elaborate prank by an unknown party. The flex fare order was traced to a stolen credit card and a burner phone, both now useless. But Sharon knew what she had experienced. Weeks later, back in the seeming safety of her apartment, she would sometimes find herself staring at her phone at the friendly blue line of the GPS. It was no longer a tool of convenience. It was a potential threat, a digital breadcrumb that could lead a monster right to her door. She eventually got Josh, the new nebulizer, but she never drove for flex fare again. The $25 from that night was never paid. She had learned the hard way that some roads are not meant to be traveled, and some places and people are better left as ghosts, lost to time in the dark, silent heart of the pines. The most terrifying part was the lingering doubt. Was Caleb Miller a man, a ghost, or just a story the pines told to keep people away? She would never know. And that uncertainty, that glitch in her understanding of the world, would haunt her for the rest of her life.
You're not supposed to be here.
There is a unique brand of quiet that settles over the Pacific Northwest when the sun goes down. It's not an absence of sound, but a changing of the guard. The drone of daytime traffic and industry gives way to the vast atmospheric hum of the wilderness. It's the sound of ancient forests breathing, a sound that can feel like peace to some and like a profound, soul-crushing loneliness to others. For Kevin Alvarez, it was usually a bit of both. Tonight, it was leaning heavily toward the latter. Kevin was 24, but he felt older. He was a resident of his own past, living back in his childhood bedroom in a modest house in Port Angeles, Washington. The posters of bands he once loved were still on the walls, faded monuments to a version of himself that felt like a stranger. He held a degree in graphic design from a respectable arts college in Seattle, a piece of paper that had cost him nearly $60,000 and, so far, had qualified him for unpaid internships and freelance logo design jobs that paid less than minimum wage. The crushing weight of his student loan debt was a physical presence in his life, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety beneath the surface of everything. His father, a retired lumber mill foreman, never said the words, "I told you so," but he didn't have to. The disappointment was there, in his silence. In the way he'd pointedly leave job listings for forklift operators on the kitchen table. His mother's quiet, worried glances were almost worse. So, Kevin drove. Every evening around 6 p.m., he'd escape the suffocating quiet of his parents' home and enter the self-contained world of his 2015 Subaru Forester. For 5 or 6 hours, he was a contractor for GoFetch, a delivery app that serviced the sprawling Olympic Peninsula. He wasn't Kevin Alvarez, the failed artist. He was just a driver, a set of coordinates on a map, a bringer of things. He found a strange solace in the anonymity of the road. Losing himself in the narratives of true crime podcasts that often played as his only companion. They were stories of order being ripped apart by chaos. And in a weird way, they made his own. Orderly, predictable life of debt and disappointment feels safe. Tonight, a podcast about a string of unsolved disappearances along hiking trails was murmuring from his car speakers. It was nearing midnight. The fog was rolling in off the Strait of Juan de Fuca, shrouding the streetlights in a hazy glow. He had just completed a delivery in a remote neighborhood and was about to head home when his phone chimed with a high-priority offer. These were rare, usually involving specialized items or difficult locations, and they paid exceptionally well. This one was a staggering $75. Kevin's breath caught in his throat. $75 was a full day's earnings. It was a significant payment toward his loans. It was a small taste of the independence he craved. He tapped accept before he could second-guess it. The details populated the screen. The pickup was from Olympus Outdoor Gear, a high-end supply store in Port Angeles that had already closed for the night. The order was prearranged for a late pickup from a secure locker. The items: 1. Iridium 9575 satellite phone and a waterproof Pelican case containing emergency medical supplies. The destination was not a street address. It was a set of raw GPS coordinates. The drop-off point was deep south, somewhere in the vast, dark expanse of the Olympic National Forest. A flicker of unease went through him. This was unusual, but this was a region of serious hikers, preppers, and off-grid researchers. Someone could be setting up a remote camp and needed their gear delivered. The app's delivery notes were precise and strange. Proceed to coordinates. Place items inside the marked container on site. Container number is 7. Close. And secure the container. Do not wait for the customer. Do not attempt to make contact. Leave immediately after drop-off. Your tip will be processed upon successful delivery. It felt less like a delivery and more like a clandestine dead drop. But for $75, Kevin told himself he could handle a little strange. He drove to the outdoor store, entered the code into the locker, and retrieved the expensive, heavy-duty gear. The satellite phone felt heavy and serious in his hand, a tool for people who went to places where normal rules didn't apply. He placed it carefully in the passenger seat and started driving south on US 101. The podcast narrator's voice describing a hiker who vanished without a trace. The transition from civilization to wilderness was gradual, then sudden. The highway gave way to a state route, and the state route gave way to a National Forest Service road, its number displayed on a small, rusted brown sign. The pavement ended. The road became a winding gravel track, and the majestic pines of the forest rose up on both sides like a solid green wall, swallowing the light from his high beams. His phone, which had been faithfully guiding him, lost its cell signal. The LTE icon vanished, replaced by the dreaded no service. A podcast cut out mid-sentence. Now, the only sound was the crunch of gravel under his tires and the low rumble of the Subaru's engine. He was running on the app's offline map, a single, lonely car icon creeping deeper into a vast, unlit void. The Forest Service road he was on, NF-28, eventually led to an even smaller, unmarked turnoff. The app insisted this was the way. The road was now little more than 2 tire tracks in the dirt, overgrown with ferns and littered with fallen branches that scraped and knocked against the undercarriage of his car. The air grew colder. A profound, absolute silence descended, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. This was no longer just a delivery. It was an expedition into the unknown. Every rational thought told him to turn back, but the thought of his father's disappointed face, the image of his student loan balance, and the promise of those $75 pushed him forward. He was almost there. He had to see it through. Finally, after another 10 minutes of crawling along the track, the synthesized voice of the app spoke into the silence, making him jump. You have arrived. Kevin stopped the car, the headlights cutting a stark white path into the darkness. He was in a small, unnaturally perfect circular clearing. The trees formed a perfect ring around a space of flattened earth and low-growing moss. It looked less like a natural clearing and more like a place that had been deliberately carved out of the woods. And in the center, exactly as the app's satellite image had shown, was a single large olive drab pelican case. The kind the military used. It was chained to the base of a massive Douglas fir tree with a heavy, industrial chain and padlock, painted. On the side, in faded white stenciled numbers, was a single-digit .7. The sheer strangeness of the scene was breathtaking. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no rustling animals, nothing. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. Kevin got out of the car, leaving the engine running and the headlights on, a small anchor to the sane world. The air was cold and smelled of pine and damp. Loamy earth. He walked over to the case, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The instructions were clear. He retrieved the satellite phone and the medical kit from his car. He opened the heavy latches on the pelican case. It was unlocked, and placed the items inside. It already contained a few other items: sealed bags of freeze-dried food, a set of high-powered binoculars, and a tightly wound coil of rope. He closed the lid, the latches clicking shut with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. Job done. The instructions were to leave immediately, but he couldn't. He was frozen in place by a powerful mixture of fear and an intense, overwhelming curiosity. Who was this for? Why this elaborate, secretive setup? The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague anxiety. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of his neck that made his hair stand on end. His eyes scanned the dark wall of trees surrounding the clearing. He saw nothing, but the feeling persisted. It was then that he noticed it. To the right of the large fir tree, almost perfectly concealed by low-hanging ferns, was the faint outline of a trail, little more than a whisper of disturbed earth leading deeper into the woods. The podcast he'd been listening to, the stories of people who vanish from trails just like this, screamed in his mind. Leave. Now. But another part of him, the part that felt like a failure, the part that needed to understand the world, needed to know. What was at the end of that path? He wouldn't go far, he told himself. Just a few feet. Just a peek. It was a decision he would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. He pulled out his phone to use its flashlight and walked toward the trail, stepping out of the safe cone of his car's headlights and into the oppressive dark of the forest. The trail was expertly hidden. After only 20 feet, the lights from his car were completely gone, swallowed by the dense woods. The path was narrow and wound deeper into the forest. The air grew even colder. After about 100 yards, the trail opened into a second, smaller clearing, and what he saw there made the blood freeze in his veins. It was a small, meticulously organized campsite, but it was abandoned. A high-tech, camouflage tent was staked to the ground, its flap open and flapping gently in the breeze. A small campfire pit was filled with cold, gray ash. A few pieces of gear were laid out neatly on a tarp. It looked like someone had been there just hours ago and had left in a hurry. His flashlight beam fell upon a small, waterproof field notebook lying open on the tarp. He picked it up. His hands trembled as he read. What was inside? It wasn't a diary. It was a logbook, a surveillance log. The pages were filled with neat, blocky handwriting detailing dates, times, and observations. His eyes scanned the entries. September 12th, 2240. Subject 5. Silver Toyota. Arrived at drop point 7. Place package. Hesitated 32 seconds. Departed. Compliant. September 14th, 2315. Subject 6. Redford F. 150. Arrived at drop point 7. Place package. Attempted to inspect chain on container. Departed after 94 seconds. nervous but compliant. Kevin felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He flipped through the pages. There were logs for a dozen different subjects, each a delivery driver like him. He was just the latest in a long line. This whole operation, whatever it was, had been going on for months. This wasn't a delivery service thought it was a screening process. He was subject 13, or 14. He didn't know. He had been lured here, tested, and observed. The clearing wasn't a destination dotted. It was a filter. A dry twig snapped in the woods directly behind him. Kevin froze, his heart instantly seizing in his chest. Every horror movie trope, every true crime podcast scenario flooded his mind in a single paralyzing wave. He was not alone. Slowly, deliberately, fighting every instinct to bolt, he turned around. Standing at the edge of the campsite, partially obscured by the shadows of the trees, was a man. He was of average height and build, dressed in dark, practical outdoor gear. Durable pants, sturdy boots, a dark jacket. He wasn't a monster or a phantom. He was just a man, which was somehow infinitely more terrifying. He held a hunting rifle with a large scope, not pointed at Kevin, but held casually across his chest. His face was unremarkable, the kind you'd forget instantly, except for his eyes. They were cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of emotion. They were the eyes of someone watching a specimen under a microscope. The man's voice was flat, calm, without anger or surprise. It was the voice of a project manager, pointing out a deviation from the plan. The instructions were very specific. You were not supposed to leave the clearing. Kevin's mind went blank. He couldn't form words. He could only stare, his phone's flashlight beam trembling violently in his hand, illuminating the man in a shaky circle of light. The man continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. We value precision. We value the ability to follow simple commands. It's the most important metric. Compliance. You were doing so well. You placed the items. You secured the container. But then you crossed the perimeter. Now you've introduced an anomaly into the data set. You've become a variable. He paused, adjusting his grip on the rifle slightly. I don't like variables. That was it. That was the sentence that broke the paralysis. The cold, detached threat. In a single, desperate, instinctual act, Kevin hurled the heavy notebook at the man's face and ran. He didn't scream. He didn't think. He just ran, crashing, blindly through the underbrush, away from the trail, deeper into the dark. The sound of the man's surprised grunt was followed a second later by the deafening, explosive crack of the rifle firing. The shot was high, splintering a branch just above Kevin's head, raining down bark and leaves. It wasn't a warning shot. It was a miss. He ran with a terror he had never known was possible. The sound of his own ragged, gasping breaths filling his ears. He could hear the man moving behind him, not running, but moving with a calm, terrifying efficiency. The sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves getting closer. Kevin stumbled, fell, scraped his hands on the rocky ground, and scrambled back up. He had no sense of direction. The forest was an endless, suffocating maze of blackness. Just as he felt his lungs would burst, he saw it, a faint familiar glow through the trees. The headlights of his car. He burst out of the tree line and into the main clearing, fumbling frantically in his pocket for his keys. He found them, his fingers too numb and clumsy to work properly. He finally jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life. He slammed the car into reverse, spinning the wheel, and peeled out of the clearing, the tires spitting gravel and dirt. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He just drove, careening down the dark, rutted track. His only thought to get back to the light, back to the paved road, back to the world where things made sense. He reached Port Angeles just before dawn, his car and clothes caked in mud, his face and arms scratched and bleeding. He drove directly to the Washington State Patrol barracks. The trooper on duty, a weary-looking man named Officer Riley, listened to his frantic, disjointed story with a practiced, skeptical patience. A delivery, a clearing, a campsite, a man with a rifle. It sounded like the ramblings of a drunk or a junkie. Riley's voice was kind. Son, there are hundreds of miles of old logging roads out there. Are you sure you know exactly where you were? Kevin gave them the GPS coordinates from his app's history. They took his statement, promised to send a patrol car out in the morning to have a look, and send him home. 2 days later, Officer Riley called him. His voice was flat and official. Mr. Alvarez. We sent a unit to the coordinates you provided. My deputies searched the area for 2 hours. There's no clearing matching your description. No container. No campsite. It's just dense old-growth forest. You must have been mistaken about the location. Kevin's blood ran cold. No, I wasn't mistaken. It was there. Riley's tone was final. It's easy to get turned around out there in the dark, son. We're closing the report. Be more careful next time. The GoFetch app showed the delivery as completed. The $75 plus an additional $25 tip was in his account. The customer had vanished. The order didn't exist in the system anymore. Kevin quit his job that day. The student debt felt like a triviality from another life. He was haunted by the cold, analytical eyes of the man in the woods. He was haunted by the knowledge that there was a system, an operation running silently in the dark veins of the wilderness, using people like him as unknowing mules. But the real horror, the agonizing doubt that kept him awake at night, came a month later. A small, unassuming cardboard box arrived in the mail, with no return address. His mother brought it to his room. Inside, nestled in foam packaging, was a brand new Iridium 9575 satellite phone, identical to the one he had delivered. Underneath, it was a small, neatly folded note. It was printed in the same neat, blocky letters as the logbook. It read, "A replacement for the asset you compromised. We value our contractors, even the ones who fail to follow instructions. Your performance has been noted. Your file is now closed. A new opportunity will be presented when you are deemed ready." Kevin stared at the phone, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. He hadn't escaped anything. He had just failed an interview. The door he had stumbled upon hadn't closed. It had simply been shown to him. He was now a part of the system he had discovered. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that it wasn't a question of if they would contact him again, but when.
Don't trust your eyes.
The high desert of Southern California holds a different kind of darkness. It's not the claustrophobic closed-in dark of a forest, but a vast, expansive emptiness that stretches out to meet a dome of cold, indifferent stars. It's a place where distances are deceptive and the silence is so profound it feels like a pressure against the ears. This was the landscape Liam Hawley chose to work in. For him, the desolation was a comfort, a quiet antidote to the noise that sometimes echoed in his own mind. Liam was 28, a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan with the U.S. Army. He had come home physically intact, but with his internal wiring subtly, permanently frayed. He carried a quiet diagnosis of PTSD, which manifested not in outbursts, but in a compulsive need for order, for logic, for things to make sense. He found that structure in the rigid, predictable world of logistics. During the day, he worked at a fulfillment center in Lancaster, a city on the western edge of the Mojave Desert. At night, he drove for Dashco, a food delivery service. The long, straight, empty roads of the Antelope Valley were his sanctuary. The clear lines of the highway, the grid-like layout of the streets, the precise instructions from the app. These things were a balm to a mind that had seen too much. Chaos. He was saving money for a down payment on a small condo, a tangible piece of the stable, quiet life he was meticulously trying to build. His sister, Elena, would call him, her voice laced with a worry he found both touching and suffocating. You okay out there, Liam? It's so empty. He'd always reassure her. It's better this way, L. Empty is safe. Tonight, the desert air was cool and dry. A near full moon hung in the sky, bathing the sandy plains in a silvery, ethereal light. He was listening to a history podcast about the Roman aqueducts, marveling at the clean, logical engineering of it all. It was just after 10 p.m. when the final order of his shift came through. The pay was decent, $22 for a pickup at a 24-hour Denny's in East Lancaster and delivery to a residence, about 12 miles out in a more sparsely populated area northeast of the city. The address was 2142 East Avenue, J-12. The name was Elias. Liam knew the area. It was where the neat suburban grid began to surrender to the open desert, where paved roads became uncertain promises. He accepted the order. The familiar routine was comforting. Pick up the bag smelling of bacon and coffee, place it securely in his passenger seat, and follow the calm blue line on his phone. He followed the GPS out of the city's glow. Avenue J was a long straight road, and as the numbers climbed, the houses grew farther apart, separated by vast lots of desert scrub and Joshua trees that cast long, skeletal shadows in the moonlight. The streetlights ended. His 2018 Honda Accord was now the only source of light, its headlights cutting a lonely tunnel through the darkness. The podcast narrator's voice was his only companion. The pavement under his tires became rougher, pockmarked, with cracks. Finally, the GPS voice, calm and unbothered, announced. Turn left onto Avenue J12. He made the turn. This was no longer a road. It was a wide, graded dirt path, the kind used by utility trucks or adventurous dirt bikers. The dust, kicked up by his tires, billowed in his rearview mirror, a ghostly plume in the moonlight. According to the map, the address was half a mile down this path. The car bumped and rattled over the uneven ground. Liam's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. This was already unusual, but not unheard of. People built homes in the most remote places out here. He kept his eyes on the path ahead, scanning for any sign of a house. The GPS chimed softly. You are arriving at your destination. It will be on your right. He slowed the car to a crawl and peered into the darkness. His headlights swept across the landscape, and then he stopped. The app confidently pinged, "You have arrived." But there was nothing there. On his right was a large, perfectly flat, empty lot. It was enclosed by a sagging chain-link fence, the kind meant to delineate property lines rather than provide security. Inside the fence, there was only sand, creosote bushes, and the occasional clump of tumbleweed. There was no house, no driveway, no mailbox, not even the rubble of a foundation. It was a pristine, untouched patch of Mojave Desert that had been fenced off for reasons unknown. Liam put the car in park, the engine's hum suddenly sounding very loud. He looked at his phone. The map showed his car icon sitting right on top of a neat, square property outline labeled 2142. He said, his voice quiet in the empty car. This has to be a mistake. He triple-checked the address in the app. It was correct. This was a significant error, a pin drop location miles off from any actual residence. It was frustrating, but it was a problem with a procedure. He would call a customer, get the correct address, and request a pay adjustment from Dashco support. He followed his process. He tapped the call customer button. The phone rang twice. Then a man's voice answered. It was clear and friendly, with a relaxed, easygoing tone. Hello? Hi, is this Elias? Liam asked Dot. This is Liam with Dashko. I'm here with your order from Denny's, but I think the app might have brought me to the wrong spot. I'm at 2142 East J12, but it looks like it's just an empty lot. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft, genuinely confused chuckle. An empty lot. What are you talking about? I'm looking right at you. Liam felt a cold prickle of unease. I'm sorry? Yeah, the white Honda Accord, right? You just turned your engine off. I'm looking at you from my upstairs window. The one on the left. I'm waving. Can you see me? Liam's gaze snapped back to the empty lot. He scanned the dark, flat expanse. There was nothing but sand and stars. His heart began to beat a little faster. His training, his experience, kicked in. Stay calm. Assess the situation. There is a logical explanation, he said, keeping his voice steady. Sir, with all due respect, there is no house here. It's a desert lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. The man Elias sighed. It was a sigh of patient frustration, the kind you give to a confused child. Okay, man, I don't know what to tell you. I'm standing here, in my house, at the address you just said. It's a 2-story house. Beige stucco, brown roof tiles. There's a big yucca plant in the front yard, right by the porch. The porch light is on. How can you not see it? Every detail he described painted a picture of a typical Southern California home. A picture that was the complete opposite of the stark reality in front of Liam. The hypervigilance that was always simmering just below his surface began to bubble up. Was this a prank? Was someone watching him with night vision goggles from a nearby hill, laughing at him? Or worse, was his own mind, the thing he feared the most, finally starting to fracture? Was he the one who wasn't seeing what was really there? Liam insisted, his voice tighter now. There is no yucca plant, sir. There is no porch light. It's just sand. Elias's friendly tone began to fray. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm hungry and my food is getting cold. Are you going to bring it to the door or not? Liam's voice rose with a mix of anger and panic. There is no door. He was losing control of the situation, and it terrified him. There was another pause. When Elias spoke again, his voice had changed completely. All the frustration was gone, replaced by a smooth, gentle, almost clinical concern. Hey, listen to me. Are you okay? You sound a little agitated. Is everything all right? The shift was so sudden, so disarming. It threw Liam completely off balance. This was gaslighting, pure and simple. It was designed to make him question his own perception. Liam said through clenched teeth, I'm fine. Your address is wrong. Elias said soothingly, Okay. Let's just figure this out. I'll prove it to you. I'm standing by the light switch for the porch. I'm going to flick the light off and on 3 times. Just watch the house and tell me if you see it. Ready? Liam stared out at the dark, empty space, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His voice was a dry whisper. Ready? Okay. 1, 2, and 3. Did you see it? Liam's eyes scanned the entire lot. Nothing. Not a flicker. The moonlight on the sand didn't change. The shadows of the bush didn't move. No, he said, his heart sinking. I didn't see anything. Elias's voice was a perfect performance of disbelief. Wow. This is really something. Okay, new plan. Hold on. Liam heard some tapping on the other end. His phone buzzed in his hand. A new text message had arrived. I just took a picture from my window and sent it to you, Elias said. Open it. With a sense of profound dread, Liam opened the message. The image loaded. And his world tilted on its axis. It was a photograph, crystal clear and perfectly composed. It was taken from a high, second-story angle, looking down at his car. His white 2018 Honda Accord was parked on a paved driveway in front of a beautiful 2-story beige stucco house. Large yucca plants stood near the porch dot, and the porch light was on. It was the exact scene Elias had described, and it was a complete, undeniable contradiction of the reality in front of his eyes. For a terrifying moment, Liam's mind went into freefall. The podcast, the empty road, the stress. Had he finally broken? Was he hallucinating the desert lot while the real world was the one in the photograph? He felt a wave of vertigo, his breath catching in his chest. But then, his training kicked in. The years of discipline of forcing his mind to find patterns in chaos. Don't react, observe, analyze the data. He pinched the screen, zooming in on the photograph. He scrutinized every pixel. The image was high resolution, but something was wrong. He zoomed in on the reflection in his car's windshield dot. It was dark and blurry, but it wasn't reflecting the front of the beige house dot. It was reflecting something else. A dark, indistinct shape that looked more like a mound of rocks than a garage door. He zoomed in on his license plate dot. It was his plate number, but the last digit was subtly distorted, the way a poorly edited image looks up close. And then he saw the final damning detail. The shadow of his car on the driveway dot. It was too sharp. The edges too defined. Dot. It was pointing in the wrong direction for a single porch light. Dot. It was the shadow of a car, photographed in broad daylight, and then digitally dropped into a nighttime scene. It was a fake, a sophisticated, expertly crafted fake. The relief of not being crazy was immediately obliterated by a much colder, sharper fear. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a glitch. This was a deliberate, calculated deception. They hadn't just faked a photo. They had a photo of his car, which meant they had seen his car before. They were tracking him. The friendly voice on the phone wasn't a confused customer. He was a puppeteer, pulling the strings, testing him. The fear shifted from internal to external. The threat was no longer his own mind. It was a very real, very intelligent, and very hidden human presence. His training took over completely now. Threat assessment, situational awareness. He killed his interior lights. He scanned the perimeter, not for a house, but for anomalies. In the desert landscape, his eyes, now adjusted to the dark, swept across the empty lot, past the fence, to the low, rocky hills about 50 or 60 yards away. He was looking for movement, for anything out of place. And then he saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible glint of light. It wasn't a flicker. It was the steady, pinpoint reflection of his own headlights off a piece of curved glass, a lens, a camera lens, or a scope. Someone was out there, hiding in the rock stopped, watching him. The entire conversation, the gaslighting, the fake photo, it was all a script, performed by someone who was likely just yards away, observing his every reaction. The purpose wasn't to get a delivery. The purpose was the observation itself. It was a psychological experiment, and he was the lab rat. Liam did not panic. His movements became slow, deliberate, and quiet. He put his phone down. He put both hands on the steering wheel. He took a steadying breath. Every instinct told him to slam the car into reverse and flee. But his training told him that sudden movements could provoke an unpredictable response from a hidden threat. He had to act like the experiment was over, like the rat was done with the maze. He put the car into drive, the small click of the gear shift sounding like a gunshot in the silence. He pulled forward slowly, made a wide, calm U-turn, and headed back down the dirt path. His eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look toward the rocks. His phone rang again. It was the same number. For a moment, he considered not answering, but he knew that was the wrong move. Answering showed control. He tapped the screen and put it on speaker. Hello? He said, his voice perfectly level. The voice on the other end was no longer Elias, the friendly customer. It was the same person, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a flat, cold, analytical tone. The voice stated, "You've terminated the interaction prematurely." Liam replied, quoting the official Dash-Go procedure, "The address was incorrect. I'm returning to the service area." There was a pause. Liam could hear the faint sound of keyboard clicks. Your reaction time to the visual stimulus was 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Your stress vocalizations peaked at the 4-minute mark. Your decision to disengage after identifying the photographic anomalies was unexpected. Liam said nothing. He just kept driving, the gravel crunching under his tires. The voice continued, "Matter dash of dash factly dot. A previous subject attempted to approach the observation point on foot. That was also an unexpected variable dot. We are refining the parameters." A cold sweat broke out on Liam's forehead. A previous subject. He was just one of many. What happened to the one who approached the observation point? He didn't want to know. The cold voice said, "This test is concluded. Your payment has been processed, along with a bonus for providing a unique data set. Do not attempt to contact this number. Again, do not report this interaction. We have your data. Liam Hall, all of it. Consider this professional courtesy. Have a good night." The line went dead. Liam drove the entire way back to Lancaster in complete, heart-pounding silence. He didn't go to the police. What would he show them? A fake photo he had already deleted in a panic? A story about a voice on the phone? They would see his service record, his diagnosis, and they would draw their own conclusions. They would think it was a flashback, a hallucination brought on by stress and solitude. He was trapped by his own history. He made it home to his quiet apartment. The digital world he had once found comfort in now felt menacing, treacherous. He looked at his phone, no longer a tool for work, but a tracking device, a window through which unseen eyes could watch and manipulate. The agonizing doubt that settled in his soul was not about what was real and what wasn't. He knew what had happened. The horror was in the why. Who were these people? What were they testing for? And what happened to the subjects who failed the test or who, like him, provided a unique data set? He had driven to the edge of the map and found not a ghost, but something far worse, a cold, clinical, and utterly human darkness. A darkness that was now aware of him. He was a known quantity, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that somewhere, in a database, his name was sitting on a list, waiting for the next experiment to begin. We live in a world built on systems of trust. We trust that the building has the number of floors the elevator panel shows. We trust that the address on the screen corresponds to a real place on the ground. We trust that the lines on the map represent roads that actually exist. And we trust that the person on the other end of the line is who they say they are. Tonight, we've walked alongside 4 individuals who saw that trust shatter into a million terrifying pieces. Marco, the architecture student, who was forced to confront a space that was deliberately erased from our reality, a secret hidden in plain sight. Sarah, the single mother, who was lured not to a house, but to the cold, dark memory of a tragedy, becoming an unwitting pawn in a story that wasn't hers. Kevin, the aspiring artist, who discovered his journey was nothing more than a clinical, terrifying test by a hidden organization that watches from the shadows. And Liam, the veteran, whose greatest fear, the unreliability of his own mind, was used as a weapon against him by an unseen manipulator hiding behind a screen. Their stories are not about ghosts or monsters in the traditional sense. The horror they experienced is quieter, colder, and far more insidious. It's the horror of discovering that the systems designed to connect and guide us can also be used to isolate, deceive, and ensnare us. It's the chilling realization that in a world so dependent on technology, a single glitch or a single malicious actor is all it takes to pull the map out from under our feet, leaving us stranded in a reality we no longer recognize. The true terror isn't finding a place that doesn't exist, it's the lingering, agonizing doubt that perhaps the safe, logical world we believe in doesn't exist either. If these stories made you think twice about that unwavering trust you place in the screen on your dashboard, then help us continue to question our reality. Subscribe to Whispered Fear, leave a like to support these chronicles, and share this with someone who needs to know what lurks in the glitches. It's the only way we can keep bringing these truths out of the dark. But perhaps the most terrifying glitch of all isn't found in the code of a satellite or a bug in an app. Perhaps the most dangerous glitch resides in the darkness of the human heart. What happens when the map isn't just wrong, but has been deliberately and maliciously altered to lead you into a trap? When the destination is real, but the promise of safety is a lie? What happens when the calm voice guiding you is not a machine, but a predator, patiently waiting for you at the end of the road? In our next deep dive, we will confront this very question. We will explore the accounts of drivers who followed their GPS, not into an anomaly of reality, but into the carefully laid plans of a human monster. We invite you to join us for 4 true horror stories of drivers who followed their GPS and ended up in a trap. Click on the video that appears on your screen and discover what happens when the final destination is you.